My name is Inés Sánchez de Madariaga. I am Professor of City Planning and the School of Architecture of Madrid and also Director of the UNESCO Chair on Gender. Well, the city is the place where we live. So it's a physical built space with infrastructure, with public space, with transportation, with housing, with places where we work. And so it's where social life takes place and it has a materiality, it's built. Well, city planners can support gender equality by looking at the way they plan, they propose projects in cities, the way they design urban space, by taking into consideration the specificity of women's lives. Because women use the city, live the city in different ways. Men do, we know that through statistics. And so it's not a normative way of understanding, but it's the reality of what's happening today. The data tell us it's women who perform on a daily basis most of the tasks that are needed for the support of daily life, for the reproduction of life, for the care of others, and particularly of those who cannot move autonomously in the city, the young and the elderly, or the sick, the handicapped. So planners can contribute to gender equality by looking in which ways cities can better respond to those specific ways of using and living in the city. For instance, by designing spaces that allow for better caretaking of kids and the elderly, by designing spaces that are safer, that women can perceive as safe and that it can go there without fearing being this is very subjective, but we have to understand that women stop going places when they perceive they are not safe. So by designing spaces that are perceived as safe, that's another important way that planners and designers can improve gender equality. Well, mobility of care is a concept that I coined in the year 2008. That was the result of a project I did for the Spanish Ministry of Transportation, in which they asked me to analyze from a gender perspective the main transportation service that were done in the country. And after looking at them, and I found a number of biases in the concepts and the way they were analyzing the data, collecting the data. And after a while, I saw that and I said, well, really, if we look at the purposes for travel, the way that those transportation services were analyzing the purpose for travel, like employment, education, shopping, strolling, visiting, escorting, many of those purposes for travel are really trips that people, mostly women in fact, do for the care of others. When you go shopping, when you go visiting someone, when you go strolling, when you accompany someone, many of these trips are not leisure trips. They are not done for personal purposes. They are done for the care of others and for the upkeep of the home. So I came up with this idea of giving an umbrella term, a category for analyzing mobility that gathers all these trips under one single name, mobility of care. So it's a category that allows us to quantify and to make visible the trips that people do for the upkeep of life and the caring of others in the city. The concept of mobility of care impacts gender equality by putting in the forefront the idea that the trips that adult individuals do for taking care of others and for the upkeep of the home are important because they are many, and they are almost as many as employment-related mobility that we have empirical evidence that this is the fact, so that trips related to mobility of care are very close to trips related to employment. So when we have this empirical evidence, this means that the priorities of investment in transportation systems, the priorities of how the transportation systems are managed, have to include care as an important objective of the policy, and this will necessarily lead to outputs in terms of the use of the transportation systems that provide better solutions to women's needs in the city, to care tasks, because the policy will be more responsive to it. So that's one way in which mobility of care can contribute to greater gender equality, because it will contribute to creating transportation systems that help women get into the labor force by improving the way that all care tasks can be performed in the city, by improving the transport. Medium-sized cities, because of their size, are much better equipped to create the conditions for gender equality, because everything is closer. They have a good level of provision of services, which is needed for everyday life, and then because they are not very big, the time spent in getting to places is smaller than in big metropolitan areas. So being a small, medium-sized city is like a precondition that helps in that. And then, of course, this is much more difficult in big metropolitan areas like Barcelona here or Madrid. And then I would say that cities that have carried out successful and efficient policies that have integrated gender considerations into their built environment, into housing, transportation, public space, etc. Vienna is the example. They are the ones that have been doing it for almost 30 years now, and they have very important pilot projects in housing, for example, those by my colleague Franziska Ullmann, a public space that has been designed taking into consideration what boys and girls of different ages need and how they use space and the relative interests in using those spaces. So I would say Vienna is the example. What can be done in 10 years? Well, I think that there's like a momentum for considering gender and women in the city, that it's in the public conversation, and but now it needs to move into actual transformation of policy, of planning. And planning cities by its very nature is not short term. So 10 years is a very short time span for things to change in a substantial way. But we have the first step, which is that nobody would say today it's not important and necessary to look at gender and women's issues in the city. That's the most important thing. Once everybody has agreed on that, and I think everybody has by now, moving into actual projects and plans and so on, it will take time, but we are in the way to it.